Pain is one of the oldest mechanisms on Earth. Ugh, my back hurts. Pain tells us move away from danger, protect the injured tissue, stop doing what causes us harm. And what happens when the body loses that alarm system is quite interesting. What happens when someone steps on something sharp, develops a blister, walks on an area of extreme pressure, thousands of steps, and never feels the warning? We all have warning signs. Warning signs are there to protect us, right? Even psychological warning signs. We're like, oh, this person doesn't rub me the right way, right? Like your intuition tells you because it's like trying to protect you from like a psychopath. And today on Diabetic Foot Files, we're exploring one of the most fascinating paradoxes in medicine. Why does diabetic neuropathy even exist? What's the evolutionary purpose of it? Why would evolution allow humans to lose such a critical protective mechanism? And how does the absence of pain create such the perfect environment for these patients that have such a high risk of limb loss? So, what is evolution actually doing? Evolution isn't about designing, it's about adapting to the environment, pretty much. A common misconception is that evolution is creating a perfect system. It does not. Evolution works through random genetic changes, environmental pressures, survival advantages, and natural selection over generations. I'm a big, like, if I see something, I'm like, that's just natural selection. And a trait remains if it helps the organism survive and continue to reproduce. Evolution isn't asking if it's perfect. Evolution asking, does this allow the person or the organism to survive long enough to pass on their genes? And, the pain of purpose is a survival system. So pain evolved because damage is dangerous. Imagine early humans, a person walks barefoot on a rough terrain. They step on something sharp. The pain causes immediate withdrawal, right? We can't see. We don't have eyes on our feet. The pain, the sensation is the eyes for our feet. If we step on something sharp, we have avoidance behavior. We'll be looking down. We'll be avoiding things that look like that, right? That rough terrain. And protection, it helps protect us from injury. And without pain, the injury worsens, the infection develops, mobility decreases, and survival decreases. Pain is not the enemy. Pain is pretty much information. So there is a big difference between knowing pain and experiencing pain. That's how they say a lot of people learn through pain, and that is a truth. Because you could say, oh, don't do it because of my past experiences. But people really don't understand that because a lot of people aren't Atticus Finch, right? They don't know how to put themselves in your shoes and understand what you're saying. A lot of people have to understand things through their POV, their point of their own perspective, right? And this is one of the most important concepts of neuropathy. Someone can understand pain intellectually without experiencing it. An example is a person can say, the stove is extremely hot, don't touch it, it will burn you, right? And that's like kids, right? And you have to remember heat causes burn, fire causes injury, stove is dangerous. But the brain never tells you personally that pain that you will experience. Now, compared to touching the hot stove, right? Your nervous system immediately creates this experience. Heat receptors activate, the electrical signals travel through the nerves, the spinal cord processes the information, the brain interprets the danger, and you withdraw your hand. So the difference of memory of pain is not the same as experiencing pain. And that's something that it happens a lot with our patients with diabetic neuropathy. They can remember and say, yes, that is dangerous, right? But they're not experiencing the pain. That's why everybody, even with pain thresholds, everybody is different, right? But they don't even have a threshold because they don't experience it at all. Okay. So pretty much. So what happens during diabetic neuropathy? So in diabetic neuropathy, the patient may still know, my doctor told me foot wounds are dangerous, but your body no longer provides that same warning signal and this area becomes injured. Right now, your brain loses information real time until it gets like super serious. So, why would the body lose the protective sensation? And that's a good evolutionary question. Why would humans lose the sensation? Well, a good answer could be that the body did not evolve diabetic neuropathy. Diabetic neuropathy is a consequence of a modern disease environment that humans did not evolve with. So for thousands of years, food scarcity was quite common. I mean, we watch Game of Thrones, right? House of the Dragon. Those people were hungry, okay? Food was a commodity, okay? Sugar intake was very limited. Physical activity was very necessary. You'll see these people working and doing things for days without even eating or eat, just, having very light meals, okay? And the human body evolved to handle periods of hunger, activity, and energy conservation. It did not evolve for this constant excess glucose, high processed, carbohydrates, this sedentary lifestyle. A lot of us have desk jobs, you know, long term metabolic distress. And diabetes creates this biochemical environment that damages the nervous system. So, how does diabetes damage the nervous system? We already know that high glucose causes oxidative stress, which is because of the excess glucose creates these harmful molecules that damages the cells. The chronic inflammation injures the nerves and the blood vessels. The the microvascular disease, the small blood vessels that nourish your nerves become damaged, and these nerves are living tissues that require oxygen, nutrients, and blood supply. And when the blood supply is compromised, the nerves do fail. So, what exactly is diabetic neuropathy? We've gone through and scratched the surface multiple times, but diabetic neuropathy is a progressive injury to the peripheral nerve system. Essentially, the sensory nerves, which are for our pain, temperature, pressure, and vibration, the motor nerves, which which controls our muscle weakness, our deformities, and our altered biomechanics, just think intrinsic minus foot. Our autonomic nerves, which affects our sweating, our skin hydration, and our blood flow regulation. And the most common pattern is the stocking glove neuropathy. I'm sure everybody knows that, especially people who took their boards, right? Like podiatry students definitely know this, and begins with the longest nerves because diabetic neuropathy begins with the longest nerves because they have the longest axons, they have the highest metabolic demand, they have the greatest transport distance from the cell body. And this is why the toes usually lose sensation before the hands. So, what is the scientific cascade of this? So, chronic hyperglycemia begins this journey. The high glucose enters the nerve cells through the pathways that do not require insulin. The nerve becomes overwhelmed, and this triggers different pathways. There's the polyol pathway. Let me just spell it POLYOL pathway activation. So, the excess glucose causes sorbitol, and sorbitol causes fructose. And the problem is that this consumes NADPH. This reduces the glutathione regeneration, and this decreases antioxidant capacity. And the result will be the oxidative stress increase, and the nerve is now living in this toxic biochemical environment. Then are advanced glycation end products. So the glucose attaches to the proteins and lipids, and this becomes advanced glycation end products. And these advanced glycation end products stiffen the blood vessels, damage the collagen, activates the inflammatory receptors, and increases the cytokine production. And the nerve environment becomes inflamed. Another pathway that is activated is the protein kinase C activation. So, high glucose activates the protein kinase C activation, and this affects the reduced nitric oxide. This causes abnormal blood flow. This causes endothelial dysfunction. This causes increased vascular permeability, and the nerve becomes pretty much ischemic. Now, another pathway is the hexosamine. Right now, I'm not saying that right. Let me just spell it HEXOSAMINE, hexosamine pathway. And this excess glucose alters the gene expression, which increases the inflammatory signal. So, pretty much, the body's just telling you, hey, I'm angry, I'm not feeling this state, and I'm inflamed. So, the inflammatory pathway. Diabetic neuropathy is not just a sugar problem, and that's a problem that a lot of people don't understand. It's not just sugar, okay? Don't just say sugar, okay? It's an immune mediated inflammatory disease, okay? So, hyperglycemia activates the kappa beta pathway, and the kappa beta is like the cellular fire alarm, right? And once it's activated, it causes an increase in TNF alpha, IL-1 beta, IL-6. MCP1, COX-2, and inflammatory enzymes. And these cytokines recruit immune cells and create this chronic low-grade inflammation. So the nerve becomes its own battlefield. The inflammation causes the Schwann cell dysfunction. So the Schwann cells normally nourishes the nerves, creates myelin, and repairs injury. But in the chronic inflammation state, this causes the decrease in myelin production, a decrease in nerve conduction, and a decrease in regenerative ability of the nerves. Another thing is the mitochondria failure. Okay, the mitochondria is our powerhouse, right? The mitochondria are the nerve power plants, and hyperglycemia actually affects the mitochondria significantly. It causes electron leakage. I say leakage, but it's leakage. It causes reactive oxygen species, ROS, and it causes mitochondrial DNA damage. The nerve cannot produce enough energy. Now, when it comes to our microvascular damage that we know affects so many of our diabetic patients, the tiny blood vessels supply the nerve, like I said. And these tiny blood vessels that supply the nerves are called vasa nervorum. And diabetes causes thickened, thickened basement membranes, endothelial dysfunction, and reduced oxygen delivery. And the nerve becomes pretty much starved. So one thing patients ask is, how long does it usually take? How long does it take to get this neuropathy? Because, I do feel bad and I empathize with patients when they do get to that point of neuropathy because they'll be treated for diabetes for so long and not know that they have neuropathy. And you're like wondering why. Why didn't anybody tell you that you have neuropathy? The question that a lot of patients ask, they're like, why didn't my other doctor tell me about this? And I'm hurt by that. I'm hurt by that because I'm kind of confused. I don't even know what to say when patients ask me that. Why didn't the doctor before tell me that? I don't know what to say when they ask me that because, I mean, I don't know what to say. I really don't. And, when it comes to diabetic neuropathy, there's no exact clock because it depends on your glucose control, your genetics, the duration of the diabetes, the smoking, if you have kidney disease, if there's obesity problem, if there's high blood pressure and lipid levels. But generally, pre-diabetes stage, neuropathy can begin even before diabetes is diagnosed. So some people already have small fiber dysfunction, pain sensitivity, changes, and abnormal nerve testing. Let's say 5 years after the diabetes diagnosis, there's a subset of patients that begin slowly having measurable nerve damage. So let's say 10 plus years of having diabetes, your risk increases significantly, and many patients develop numbness, loss of protective sensation, balance problems, and a foot ulcer risk. Let's say it's been 20 years since their diabetes diagnosis, so severe neuropathy can become, they start developing foot deformities like neuropathy, or recurrent ulcerations and having intrinsic myelin foot and those clawing toes. And then the increase of amputation gets higher. So why are feet so vulnerable? So feet are amazing. We love them. That's why we're podiatrists. And it's distance from the heart, right? So the longest nerves in the body travel to the feet. Think of a telephone cable. The longest cable experiences the problems first. This is why diabetic neuropathy often begins with that stocking glove distribution, meaning the toes first, the feet next, and then the hands later. So you have to remember the feet experience repetitive trauma daily. Every day we're walking on it, okay? With pressure, shear forces, and friction. And thousands of steps a person without neuropathy can feel my feet are hurting me. I've been on my feet all day, right? And my feet hurt. I need to stop, right? Because pain is what makes us stop. Persons with neuropathy, they can continue. They can continue because they don't have that warning signal. Hey, you got to stop. This is hurting the skin. There's pressure building up. There's inflammation. It's not happy. The foot bears the entire weight of our body. That's why they're so important. The foot is an engineering masterpiece. It absorbs ground reaction forces, the weight transfer, the shock absorption, and diabetes changes that system. It reduces sensation, the muscle imbalance, the foot deformity, the altered biomechanics, and the foot continues to receive damage without even protecting it. And then when it comes to the cascade from neuropathy to amputation, let's say step one would be high glucose that damages the nerve. Step two would be loss of protective sensation develops. Step three would be the patient cannot feel pressure of trauma. Step four is repeated stress, callus formation. Step five is pressure continues underneath the callus. Step 6 is skin breaks down. Step 7 is the ulcer develops. Step 6 is bacteria enters. Step 9 is infection progresses. Step 10 is bone involvement may occur. And step 11 would be limb risk. Okay. So let's think about the microbial evolution of the diabetic foot. So bacteria are always evolving. They evolve within hours, for goodness sakes. And just like humans adapt, bacteria are great adapters. They're better adapters than humans. They survive by responding to their environment. They're quite tricky. They're quite smart. They're quite fascinating, in my opinion. So, a diabetic foot provides warmth, moisture, nutrients, damaged tissue, and reduced immune defense. And this creates an environment where certain bacteria can thrive are common bacteria that usually affect our diabetic foot ulcers, but don't forget the bacteria that we talk about in Got an Infection Friday, yay. But things like Staph aureus, like MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, thrives on skin, forms biofilms, develops antibiotic resistance. They think they're the bad guys, okay? The biofilm acts as the protector of the community. We already know how particular biofilm is and how hard it is to treat, and that's why we got to get rid of biofilm plays a huge role. So that's one thing we always have to think about when it comes to our wound dressings for our patients. And bacteria can hide from immune cells in the biofilm. They can hide from antibiotics in the biofilm. They can hide from environmental stress in the biofilm. The biofilm is like a bacterial heaven, okay? Now, Streptococcus species. These bacteria can spread through the tissue very fast, okay? These are things that cause cellulitis, soft tissue infection. Now, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, everybody knows that's one of my favorite organisms, not because of what it does, just because of how interesting it is. It's very loud, it has a presence, and it likes to, be green, okay? So, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, a fascinating organism that thrives in moist environments. It forms biofilms, it adapts quite quickly, it has multiple resistance to antibiotics, often associated with chronic wounds. I never doubt Pseudomonas at any second, okay? Previously treated wound and moist wound environments. Now, enterobacterial bacteriaceae, okay, like E. coli, Klebsiella, Proteus, these organisms may enter a wound from the surrounding environments and can become significant pathogens, especially in deeper and chronic wounds. And you have to always remember that when a wound is chronic, the bacteria is quite powerful. They're not these easy bacteria when it's a chronic wound. They earned their spot there. Okay. The bacteria definitely did. So don't ever underestimate the bacteria that's on a chronic wound. Okay. You got to be aggressive. So, but also think about antibiotic stewardship. Please just, that's the whole point. Let's use our minds. So the evolutionary battle, the wound environment becomes the ecosystem. We already explained that. So you have a human tissue trying to heal, the immune cells are trying to fight it, and the bacteria are trying to survive. The bacteria is like, hey, I claim this land, I want it. And we're trying to say no. Okay, move. Okay, move out the way. Okay, we're trying to heal this person. And as healthcare providers, we're trying to disrupt that cycle. This is an evolutionary battlefield. So, the paradox of neuropathy is pain is to protect us, but in diabetes, the loss of pain becomes quite dangerous for our patient. And the patient does not suffer from the injury immediately, but the absence of the pain allows the injury to continue. Okay. And the very system designed to protect us, survival is missing. So, can we replace the alarming system? Absolutely. That's what the doctors are here for. That's what we're here for. We become the warning system for our patients who have diabetic neuropathy. We are the warning system. Okay. We are. Okay. We're the watchers of the wall, right? That's pretty much it. We're Game of Thrones. We're the wall watchers. Okay. There we go. Looking for winter is coming, right? That's us. That's what we are. That's what doctors are. We're the wall watchers. We're people on the wall watching for the winter for the night king. Okay. The night king is neuropathy and a PAD. Okay? So definitely think about that. Like us as podiatrists, we got to check for the pressure points, the calluses, skin deformities, the circulation. Primary care doctors and endocrinologists are helping with the glucose management. Sometimes they're the first people to see the patient. Early referrals, neuropathy screening, cardiovascular risk stratifications, and stuff like that. Vascular specialists, we love you, vascular. You are my son. Because a wound cannot heal without blood flow, we have to ask, does this foot have enough circulation to survive. Infectious disease, we need you because bacteria is not passive. They are adaptive. They evolve. They form communities. Okay. That's so sad that bacteria have better communities than we do. Okay. They know how to stick together. We should know how to do that too to combat against them. They hide within the biofilms. They require expertise to defeat them. As wound care specialists, we understand tissue biology, pressure, moisture balance, infection, and the healing pathways, and our orthotists, and foot specialists. Okay. The wound begins with pressure, time, and repetitive trauma. Offloading isn't just a treatment, it is a must and it's prevention, okay? It's preventative. Offloading is definitely key, okay? If we get every diabetic in the right shoe, we can save so many feet, okay? The right shoe, okay? Full evaluation, biomechanical and all, okay? But what happens is in diabetic neuropathy, we as healthcare providers, we become the warning system for the patient, okay? The patient has lost their internal warning system. We have become the external warning system, which includes regular screening, monofilament testing, temperature monitoring, pressure monitoring, imaging technology, smart devices, clinical surveillance, okay? So in the end, we have to remember what type of role we play. We are limb savers, okay? And the limb salvage connection is that, the tragedy of diabetic neuropathy, the patient loses the warning system before they loses their limb. And the foot literally becomes blind, okay? Just like how people have diabetic retinopathy, diabetic neuropathy of the foot is a blind organ now attached to the body. So if the patient steps on the glass, develops pressure, necrosis, infection, or anything, they won't feel anything. The wound is not painful, the wound is silent, and the silence becomes quite dangerous. So diabetic neuropathy simply is not just death of the nerves. It's a story of an ancient alarm system that is overwhelmed by a modern metabolic stress storm. And the foot did not betray the patient. The warning system has certainly just slowly turned off, okay? And although the body lost its sensation, humanity, us as humans, the humanities, responds by creating this connection for the patient. One person lost sensation becomes a community's responsibility. And us as limb salvage specialists, we become part of the community. The healthcare provider system is the community that becomes the warning system for these patients, and we have to take more action in that. Okay, the patient does not feel the injury, but us as the team, the healthcare team, we see it. Okay, the patient might not see it or feel the pressure, but us as clinicians, we can measure it. We can see it ahead of time. So although pain is an incredible gift, if it says our body needs attention, but for millions of people living with diabetic neuropathy, the message is quite quiet and the foot becomes vulnerable because the alarm system is missing. And so the mission of limb preservation isn't just about treating wounds. It's about replacing that lost warning system and we become the warning system. So with every foot exam, every conversation, every piece of education, every screening test, every provider and professional involved together, we become the warning system for our patient. Okay, we become that diabetic village. Okay, and as the village listens, we help heal. So this has been Diabetic Foot Files, where science, evolution, and limb preservation come together. And I'm Dr. G, and take care of your feet because they take care of you.